Good morning. Today we are going to discuss a topic that honestly I'm very passionate and more than a little bit biased about, so I apologize in advance because this video will be a long one. Today we will be tracing a general timeline of women's rights. Let's start with the part that everybody knows. The first wave was political and centered on gaining the right to vote. In many places, women gained the right to vote before universal rights were established. In fact, many women of European descent used that to their advantage. They claimed that there needed to be a greater percentage of white voters than voters not of European descent. Certain women in the Isle of Man gained the right to vote in 1881, and in 1887, the Utah Territory, which had previously granted women suffrage, took away that suffrage. In Ontario, widows could vote in municipal elections in 1884, and the United States proposed a constitutional amendment to extend suffrage in 1888. New Zealand was the first self-governing country to allow women to vote in parliamentary elections in 1893. Way to go, New Zealand. North Africa followed suit in 1894, but this only applied to women of European descent. In 1898, Utah reinstates women's rights to vote, and Idaho follows suit. The Australian Commonwealth Franchise Act of 1902 enabled women to vote in federal elections and allowed them to stand for election in Australian Parliament. In 1906, what would become the Republic of Finland followed suit and was the first country to have women in Parliament. In Saudi Arabia, women were first allowed to vote December 2015. Now let's look at some specifics of North America, starting with Canada. I'm proud to say that the women's rights movement is thought to have started developing in the prairie provinces, but we're going to be looking a lot at Ontario right now. The federal government granted limited suffrage during wartime to certain women in 1917 and allowed full suffrage by 1918. By 1923, all provinces except Quebec granted suffrage to all women in Canada, and Quebec granted it in 1940. Originally, only women who owned property, except those that were married, could vote. Asian women, and men for that matter, were not granted the right to vote until 1948, and that was after the Second World War. Suffrage was extended to Indigenous women and men without requiring them to give up their treaty status in 1960. This amazing upset began in 1876 when the brilliant Dr. Emily Stowe came to Toronto to study medicine. She came before the public to lecture about the new women's sphere and women in professions. She attended a meeting of the American Society for the Advancement of Women in Cleveland in 1877, and after meeting women from the United States, she decided that it was time for Canadian women to have a similar union. She enlisted Helen Archibald, and in 1877 they organized the Toronto Women's Literary Club. Over the course of the next 5 years, the club grew and gained a surprising amount of attention from the press. Few members worth mentioning included Mary McDonnell, Mrs. W.B. Hamilton, and Mrs. J. Austin Shaw. This was a precarious time for women's rights, and the group was not specifically a suffragette society, but they took every opportunity to promote the idea. In 1883, the club decided that since public opinion had shifted in support of suffrage societies, they would disband in order to form the Canadian Women's Suffrage Association. First task they undertook was securing the right to vote, saying that it was unjust to exclude married women from this right, while allowing widows and certain unmarried women to vote. In 1884, the Ontario Municipal Act was amended to give married women the right to vote. It is believed that in early 1890, a Dominion Women's Enfranchisement Convention may have been assembled, and was. And delegates from several suffragette clubs were to be received, including women from the United States. By 1895, the only province that did not have some form of legislation surrounding the women's right to vote was Prince Edward Island. There were 5 women that are most commonly mentioned when you talk about suffragettes. The famous 5 who petitioned for rights and fought for women to legally be considered persons and be appointed to the Senate. There's a house dedicated to teaching about these women and honoring them at the Heritage Park in Calgary, Alberta. The protests in the United States are more commonly talked about because everyone uses the States as a model or example for everything. And the fight for the right to vote got fairly violent there, and in a lot of other places too. Protests in front of the White House during World War I, well, the protesters were arrested and tortured. One of my favorite representations of a suffragette in the media is Mrs. Banks from Mary Poppins, who may have been one of my favorite Halloween costumes to date. What is that song she sings? Cast off the shackles of yesterday, shoulder to shoulder into the fray. Our daughters will adore us as they sing in grateful chorus. Well done, Sister Suffragette. Well done, Sister Suffragette. Now, you may think that that the fight for women's rights ended with gaining the right to vote, but that would only serve to show how ignorant and uneducated you are. But that's not your fault, because our society tries to ignore women's issues as much as possible and educates based on what it is told to do by the patriarchy. So that's fun. So, after women won the right to vote, they had to fight for the right to control their own bodies and the right to work. We still have to fight for those quite often, actually. So, for a very long time, any form of birth control, excepting abstinence, was illegal. This was more than partially, because a woman's only purpose for a long time was thought to be bearing children, and birth control kind of negated that purpose. However, birth control can be used for purposes other than simply preventing pregnancy. It can be used to regulate hormone levels, it can be used to prevent one from feeling like they are dying once a month, and in some cases prevent women from being incapacitated because of pain during their menstrual cycle, though this isn't likely how women originally used it when it was created. The first birth control clinic in the United States was opened in 1916, though it wasn't exactly accepted at first. Women also had to fight for the right to have a maternity leave, my phone is buzzing a lot. Women also had to fight for the right to have maternity leave, as it was widely assumed that once a woman had a baby, she would stop working altogether and not return to her job. In Canada, the Maternity Protection Act of 1921 introduced legislation that ensured work leave for mothers and stated that women were enabled to take a leave of absence before and after the birth of her child, and ensured that women could not be dismissed during this leave of absence. It also allowed a woman 30 minutes twice a day to nurse her child while at work, and hefty fines were placed on employers who did not abide by this legislation. By the 1960s, over 30% of women between 20 and 30 were a part of the Canadian workplace, and by the end of the 1970s, that number had doubled to 60%. Between 1979 and 1981, unions pushed for more accessible and longer maternity leave. But before women had to worry about whether or not they could return to work after having a child, they had to fight for the ability to work. And for a very long time, the only jobs available to women were secretary jobs at best. And equal pay, well, that was out of the question. It still is, even though it is in fact illegal in many countries, including the United States, to assign wage based on one's sex. They come up with some excuse, and if you speak up, you get fired and blacklisted. But now we are getting into the third wave, and more present times. Now, I'm going to give you a warning. This is where I'm going to get really salty, and here we're talking a little less specifically about rights, because now we're less fighting for specific rights because we are technically legally equal in every way. I'm talking about how society has not granted us full access to the rights that we are legally granted, and society does not treat us the way that it should. So, let's get into this very fun part. Okay, so welcome back to the future, the time when feminism is flourishing as the patriarchy tells us not to wear leggings because it isn't fair to male teachers. To the teachers, not other students, the teachers. So, the time when we have access to birth control and abortions, and a time when if I don't want to have children, I don't have to. But if I don't want to, and if I choose to use birth control, I'm not being fair to my husband should I choose to get married, and I'm a killer if I use that birth control. A time when I, as a feminist, get called names that start with S and C and B because I think I should be treated like a human being instead of an object of men's desire. And I'm very vocal about this belief. We live in a time when all people are equal, but most men consider a room with 50% men and 50% women to be mostly women. A time when the leader of one of the most powerful countries in the world is a misogynist, sexist man who regularly makes lewd, inappropriate, degrading comments towards women, resulting in a march on the White House with the slogan, "Not my president." A time when we have the Me Too movement, and it is countered with the hashtag Not All Men movement and the hashtag It's Not Rape movement, because being accused of sexual assault may be one of the most traumatic and horrific, dehumanizing experiences that a human can experience. No, being raped is the most dehumanizing, horrific thing you can experience. But being guilty as a 16-year-old white male could destroy his future career, and we wouldn't want that, so we blame the victim and we slut shame her. We also live in a time when we have the right to vote, the right to maternity leave, the right to fight for equal pay, and the right to scream back on street corners when we are catcalled. When a man yells lewd things from his truck window at 12-year-olds, they know they can flip the guy off. And when the school calls their moms because they punched the boy who wouldn't stop snapping their bra strap, their mom can sue and call the school board. Some people may say we are in a fourth wave of feminism, where we aren't only fighting for women's rights, but the rights of women who have become entangled in other oppressed groups. Feminism isn't about women fighting to vote anymore. Now it's about trans women. It's about white women it's not about how white women trampled black women in order to get the vote. It's about how all people are equal and about how women need to stop trampling each other for the quest for rights to vote and equality. The timeline of the evolution of women's rights has become tangled with the evolution of human rights. It isn't just about women anymore. Feminism is about showing men that it isn't girly to express emotion, and even if it is, being girly is not an insult. It's about how if you like to play with dolls, you're not gay. It's about showing that being a woman doesn't mean that you are lesser, and that the phrase, "you fight like a girl," should mean that they should fear you. Feminism is about the fact that we have movies like Ghostbusters that had a female main cast, and the main plot wasn't about finding a man. It is about the fact that the bar for movies is so low that we are amazed that in this Ghostbusters movie, women are shown eating in a movie like normal human beings, and it isn't transformed into something sexy. And there are no fat jokes. It's just about the fact that they need to eat because they're humans. And they do. That's how low the bar is for us in movies. Feminism is about the fact that we call Black Panther a more feminist movie than Wonder Woman because Wonder Woman goes, "Hey, the girl is strong," and Black Panther goes, "Hey, look, these women are strong and powerful, and they can do whatever they want and be in whatever position in society they want." It's not about just being strong. Changing a boy's name with a girl's name is not giving that girl power in that movie. Feminism is about how we don't romanticize violence anymore, how we know that the Joker was abusive to Harley Quinn, and the movies have started to reflect that. But it's still not enough because men still see women as sexual objects, not people. Because little girls get catcalled, and rape is still happening, and men still deny that the victim is the person who was forcibly made to have sex, not the person who could have easily walked away. Feminism is about saying that all bodies are beautiful and everyone is perfect. Men, women, any color, everyone. Feminism now is about showing men that they can be emotional and that we don't need to believe that they are inherently evil and that we can believe that they can control themselves. Feminism now is about saying, save the person about breast cancer instead of sexualizing a disease that can be deadly, but also degrading a woman's worth to be degrading her, saying that her worth is only her breasts. The whole point of breast cancer treatment is usually to remove most of the breast. The slogan, save the boobies, is not a good slogan for this disease. We are doing the exact opposite. It should be save the person, because the person is the one who is dying of a disease. And if removing her breasts will do that, then yeah, she's gonna remove them. Because now we don't shut up and walk away. Some still do, because yeah, we are terrified. No matter how much we deny it, being a feminist puts a target on your back. Comments online, insults hurled across the street, and most terrifying, men in your own life. Fighting the patriarchy is about how your uncle makes sexist comments over Christmas dinner, and when you call him out, not only does your entire family rebuke you, he tells you that you don't get an opinion because you're just a little girl when you're 18 or 23. And yeah, it's better than it used to be. Way better. Like I said, we can vote, we have maternity leave. I'm allowed to be saying this right now. But if we only settle for what is better than what was and stop pushing, we won't we we won't go any further. We'll stay here. What would have happened if the suffragettes went, you know what, our husbands aren't abusing us, we're just going to stop here? They wouldn't have the right to vote. What would happen if the women lobbying for birth control had gone, you know what, we have the right to vote, we're going to stop there? We wouldn't have the ability to use birth control right now. And what's going to happen if I sit here and go, you know what, I have access to birth control if I want it, I have the right to vote, technically I'm equal. You know what, I'm going to stop there. You know what's going to happen? There's still going to be the patriarchy. There's still going to be little girls getting catcalled. There's still going to be men who see women as only sexual objects, because it's not just about fighting for women's rights anymore. Now it's about, we have the rights. Now we want to be treated like it. We want to be treated like humans. We want everyone to be treated like a human being, because white men are not the only people who are human beings. And that is what feminism is about now. Feminism now is about equality. Feminism is about how women's rights have evolved to the point where it's no longer about, we want something more, we want a vote of more. Now it's about, we know that we deserve more because we are getting less than men. It's because we know that we deserve more because there are people, not just women, there are other people who are being treated like they are less than human. Feminism now is about equality for everyone. Feminism now is about telling women and men and children and people who do not define themselves with a gender, it's about telling them that they have a choice every single day in every single thing they do, and no one can force them to do anything, shame them into doing anything, bully them into changing their minds, because they are all equal and they are all able to do whatever it is that they decide to do. And sometimes that is not so good. Sometimes that results in the little girls getting catcalled and the girl across the street getting raped. And that's not okay. But the reason why we still have that is because those people are still not seen as people. So how do we fix it? Well, the evolution of women's rights. We got the right to vote. We got access to birth control and abortions. We're allowed to work. Our pay is getting better. We've had people in parliament. And you know what? Now we're looking for it within society. Now we're looking for it within our peers. So how do we fix it? We start acting on the rights that we have been given.